Frank Miller drove his old pickup truck down the dusty road, following the hand-drawn map he had received by mail. The afternoon sun beat down on the Montana countryside, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Frank wiped sweat from his forehead and squinted at the horizon. According to the advertisement he had spotted in the regional farming bulletin, there was a stallion for sale with bloodlines that could significantly improve his ranch's breeding program. As a third-generation cattle rancher, Frank knew the value of good horses. His grandfather had started their ranch with just 2 cows and a single horse. Now, with over 300 head of cattle, the Miller Ranch needed reliable mounts more than ever. The drought last year had stretched their finances thin, and Frank couldn't afford to buy from the fancy breeders closer to the city. This remote farm offering a quality horse at a reasonable price seemed like a stroke of luck. The truck's navigation system beeped, indicating he had reached his destination. Frank turned onto a narrow dirt path that wound up into the foothills. After about half a mile, the trees opened up to reveal a property unlike any ranch he had seen before. Frank parked in front of the main house and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Something felt off about the place. The farmhouse looked normal enough, painted white with a wraparound porch, but the outbuildings had an unusual design. What appeared to be grain silos were made of a material that gleamed too brightly in the sun. The windmill turned, despite the lack of breeze. Most concerning of all, the livestock in the distant pastures stood unnaturally still, like statues rather than living animals. "Hello there. You must be Frank Miller," a voice called out. Frank turned to see a tall, thin man walking toward him from behind the house. The man extended his hand in greeting. "Harold Kane," he introduced himself. "Moved here about 3 years. Go from back east. Thanks for making the trip out. Not many folks willing to drive this far these days." Frank shook Harold's hand, noting how cold it felt despite the warm day. "Nice place you got here. Pretty remote." "That's the appeal," Harold replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Privacy is important in my line of work." "And what line of work is that?" Frank asked, making conversation while studying the unusual layout of the farm. "Research," Harold answered vaguely. "Agricultural innovations mostly. But you're here for the horse, not my boring science talk. Follow me to the barn." Frank followed Harold across the yard. His truck's dashboard monitor had been acting strange since he arrived, showing unusual energy readings that flickered on and off. Frank made a mental note to have the system checked when he got back to town. The barn was large and painted the traditional red, but like everything else on the property, something seemed off about it. The doors slid open silently on hidden tracks rather than swinging on hinges, and the interior lighting came on automatically as they entered. "Nice setup," Frank commented, looking around at the immaculate stalls. "Thanks. I believe in keeping up with technology," Harold said. "The stallion is in the back. 4 years old, excellent temperament, strong bloodlines." As they walked down the center aisle, Frank noticed how quiet the barn was. Even the horses barely made a sound, watching them pass with unnaturally alert eyes. Harold stopped in front of a stall containing a magnificent black stallion. The horse was beautiful, with a gleaming coat and perfect conformation, but it didn't move or react to their presence. It just stared, almost as if it were frozen in place. "Is he sedated?" Frank asked, growing more uneasy by the minute. "Just very well trained," Harold replied. "I insist on perfect behavior from all my animals." A device on Harold's wrist suddenly lit up with a pulsing blue light. He glanced at it and frowned. "I apologize, but I need to take this urgent message. Feel free to look around. The stallion's papers are on the wall there. I'll be back shortly." Harold hurried out of the barn, the doors sliding shut behind him. Frank approached the stallion cautiously. The horse still didn't move, not even flicking an ear. When Frank touched its neck, the skin felt oddly firm and slightly cool. This was not normal. None of this was normal. A muffled sound caught Frank's attention. It seemed to be coming from an empty stall at the very end of the barn. Frank hesitated, then decided to investigate. The sound came again. Definitely a human noise, not an animal. The stall appeared empty at first glance, just clean straw covering the floor. But when Frank stepped inside, He noticed a section of the floor that looked different from the rest. He brushed away the straw to reveal a metal trapdoor with a simple latch. The sound came again, definitely from below. Frank took a deep breath and pulled open the trapdoor. A ladder led down into darkness. After a moment's hesitation, he descended into the underground space. The room below was dimly lit with a blue-green glow. Frank's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, he froze in shock. A woman lay bound to a metal table in the center of the room. Thin, silvery restraints wrapped around her wrists, ankles, and waist, sometimes seeming solid and sometimes almost transparent, like they were flickering in and out of existence. She was conscious, her mouth covered with what looked like a patch of the same material as the restraints. Frank approached slowly, heart pounding. The woman's eyes widened when she saw him. They were unusual eyes, with vertical pupils that reflected the dim light like a cat's. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it with subtle patterns that seemed to move beneath the surface. She was definitely not like any human Frank had ever seen. Fighting against his fear and confusion, Frank reached out and carefully removed the covering from her mouth. The material felt strangely alive under his fingers, almost like it was trying to cling to his skin. The woman gasped for breath, then looked directly into Frank's eyes. "Please. Help," she said in halting English. "Not what you think. Danger to your world." Frank took a step back. "Who are you? What are you?" "Name is Liana," she replied, her accent strange but understandable. "I am observer from Vashin Collective. Man upstairs is not human. He is criminal named Herex Canis. He took me prisoner when I discovered what he does here." Frank's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. "What does he do here?" "He hunts your kind, takes them, uses their bodies for experiments, makes weapons to sell to enemies of both our peoples." Liana struggled against her bonds. "If you free me, I can help stop him, but we must hurry. He knows something is wrong. Security systems warned him." From upstairs came the sound of the barn doors sliding open. Frank heard Harold's, or Herex's, footsteps, approaching the open trapdoor. In that moment, Frank had to make a choice that would change his life and possibly the fate of the entire human race. Frank acted quickly. He grabbed a nearby tarp and threw it over the trapdoor, then stepped away just as Harold appeared in the stall doorway. "Finding everything to your liking?" Harold asked, his voice friendly but his eyes cold and calculating. Frank forced a smile. "Just checking out the stalls. You keep a clean barn." Harold's gaze flicked to the tarp on the floor, then back to Frank. "That area needs repair. Nothing for you to worry about." "The stallion looks good," Frank said, trying to sound normal. "But I need to think about the price. Mind if I look at those papers again?" Harold seemed to relax slightly. "Of course, take your time." They walked back to the stallion's stall, and Frank pretended to study the documents while his mind raced. The woman, Liana, had said Harold wasn't human, that he was hunting people. It sounded crazy, but after what he'd seen, Frank couldn't dismiss it. "I think I'll need to come back tomorrow," Frank said, turning to Harold. "Bring my trailer. I left it at home since I wasn't sure about the horse." Harold nodded. "That's fine. Same time tomorrow?" "Perfect," Frank agreed, knowing he had no intention of returning unprepared. As Frank walked toward the exit, a phone in Harold's pocket made an unusual chirping sound. Harold glanced at it and frowned. "Actually," Harold said, his voice suddenly different, harder, "I don't think tomorrow will work." Frank felt something cold press against his back. He turned slowly to see Harold holding what looked like a gun, but unlike any gun Frank had ever seen. It was sleek with no visible barrel, just a glowing blue tip. "You've seen something you shouldn't have," Harold said, all pretense gone. "Back to the stall. Now." Frank backed up slowly, his hands raised. Harold directed him to the trapdoor and ordered him to remove the tarp and climb down. Frank had no choice but to comply. When they reached the underground room, Liana watched them with wide eyes. Harold pushed Frank against the wall and pressed a small device to his neck. Frank felt a sharp sting, then numbness spread through his body. He slumped to the floor, unable to move but still conscious. Humans, Harold muttered, so predictably curious. He turned to Liana. Your rescue attempt failed before it began. I'll deal with both of you after I finish preparations. Harold climbed back up the ladder and closed the trapdoor, leaving Frank and Liana alone. Can you move? Liana asked after a moment. Frank tried to respond, but his mouth wouldn't work. Only his eyes could still move. Temporary paralysis, Liana explained. We'll wear off soon. Listen carefully. I can free myself if you help. Frank blinked once, the only response he could manage. Good. When you can move, come to table. Press sequence on my restraints. 3 quick presses, 2 slow, 3 quick again. They waited in silence, gradually feeling return to Frank's body, starting with his fingers and toes. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, he could move his arms. He crawled to Liana's table. Hurry, she whispered. Security systems will detect your movement soon. Frank located a small panel on the side of the table and pressed as instructed. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. The silvery restraints flickered, then disappeared completely. Liana sat up, rubbing her wrists. Thank you, she said. Now we must talk quickly before he returns. What are you? Frank asked, finally able to speak properly. I am from Vashin Collective, a civilization from Star System, you call. She paused, then pointed to a spot in the air as if Frank could see what she was indicating. No translation. Not important now. You're an alien, Frank said flatly. Yes. Like man upstairs, but different kind. He is criminal in my world. Stole experimental technology and fled here. Why Earth? Your planet sits in border area between 3 galactic powers. Jurisdiction unclear. Also, your world classified as pre-integration. Off limits to contact. Frank struggled to his feet, the paralysis wearing off more completely. And what's he doing here? Those animals upstairs don't seem real. They are not. Biological constructs. Decoys. Liana moved to a wall covered in symbols Frank didn't recognize. Herax Canis Harold Kane in your language has been taking humans from isolated areas, extracting genetic material and brain tissue. Frank felt sick. Why? To create hybrid biological interfaces for weapons he stole. Liana's fingers traced patterns on the wall, causing sections to light up. Human biology unique. Your species, adapted differently than most. Your neural systems resistant to many forms of control technology used throughout galaxy. Is that good or bad? Frank asked. Both. Makes humans valuable. Also dangerous. Liana pressed her palm flat against the wall and a hidden compartment opened. Herax plans to sell weapons with human components to species called Norvac. They would use against both our peoples. Frank tried to process everything he was hearing. So he's basically a weapons dealer hiding out on Earth. Yes, and I was sent to find him when we detected energy signatures, but he captured me 3 days ago. She retrieved what looked like a bracelet from the compartment and slipped it on her wrist. Immediately her appearance shifted slightly. Her eyes became more human-looking and the luminous patterns on her skin faded. Camouflage, she explained. Not perfect, but helps blend in. Suddenly, a loud clicking sound filled the room, and red lights began flashing. What's happening? Frank asked. Security lockdown, Liana said, her voice urgent. He knows you freed me. A speaker hidden in the ceiling crackled to life. Harold's voice, or rather Herax's voice, came through clearly. Very impressive, he said, but ultimately futile. The barn is now sealed. The security system will release paralytic gas in 5 minutes. By then I'll be preparing my shuttle for departure. I've accelerated my timetable. Earth has served its purpose as a hiding place. Can you stop the gas? Frank asked Liana. She shook her head. Not from here. But if we can reach main security controls in-house, yes. How do we get out of here? Liana looked around the room. There must be emergency exit. All his facilities have one. Frank began examining the walls. What exactly did he mean by shuttle? Ship, hidden somewhere on property. He plans to leave. Your planet. With weapons made from human parts, Frank said grimly. Yes, and data to make more. Liana joined him in searching the walls. If he delivers to Norvac, consequences will be severe for both our species. Frank pressed against a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. It gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel. Found it, he said. Good work, Liana replied. We have little time. 4 minutes until gas. They crawled into the tunnel, racing against time. As they moved forward, Frank asked, If we stop him, what happens? Will your people come? I should call for extraction. But she hesitated. That would mean revealing Earth has been compromised. Might trigger quarantine protocol. What does that mean? Your planet isolated. No travel in or out, sometimes for decades. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Frank could see light ahead. Is there another option? We focus on stopping Harex first. Talk about consequences later. They reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into what appeared to be a storage shed behind the main house. As they climbed out, they heard a deep, humming sound coming from beyond the barn. His ship, Liana said. He's starting launch sequence. Frank looked at her. His world forever changed in the span of a single afternoon. Then we better hurry. Frank and Liana crouched behind the storage shed, surveying the property. The main house stood about 50 yards away, with the large red barn off to the right. Beyond the barn, a strange shimmer in the air revealed what must be Harex's hidden ship, now beginning its launch preparations. We need a plan, Frank whispered. Can we shut down his ship from the house? Liana shook her head. Ship controls are separate, but we might find weapons in-house. Also, other prisoners. Other prisoners? Frank asked, alarmed. Yes. Harex never takes just one subject. There will be others. Frank thought about the implications. More people kidnapped, experimented on. His jaw tightened. Let's check the house first then. They moved carefully across the open ground, using a line of decorative bushes for cover. Frank noticed cameras mounted on the roof corners, swiveling to scan the property. Those cameras will spot us, he said. Liana studied them. Simple technology. I can disable nearby ones with this. She tapped her bracelet. But effect is brief. We must move quickly between blind spots. She made an adjustment to her bracelet, and the nearest camera sparked and went dark. They sprinted to the back porch of the house. Frank tried the door. Locked. Stand. Back, Liana said. She pressed her palm against the lock and it clicked open. Harex uses similar security systems to my people. Advantage for us. They slipped inside to a kitchen that looked perfectly normal except for strange appliances tucked between the refrigerator and stove. The house was silent. Where would he keep other prisoners? Frank asked. Below ground like you. Basement or cellar? They searched the house quickly, finding a door in the hallway that led down to a basement. As they descended the stairs, they heard muffled sounds coming from behind a heavy metal door. Liana worked on the control panel beside the door, while Frank kept watch. After a few moments, the panel beeped, and the door slid open. Inside, they found 3 people strapped to beds similar to the one that had held Liana. 2 were human, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a young man barely out of his teens. The 3rd prisoner was clearly not human, with blue-tinted skin and multiple small tentacles where a human would have fingers. More of your people? Frank asked Liana as they hurried to free the prisoners. No, different species. From Eltaran system, rival to Norvac. Liana worked on the restraints of the alien while Frank freed the humans. The woman gasped as her restraints disappeared. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse. I'm Olivia Ward. I was hiking near my cabin when he took me. That was, I don't know how long ago. 2 weeks, said the young man as Frank helped him sit up. I counted the feeding times. I'm Gary Phillips. I was camping in the National Forest. He looked at Liana and the other alien with wide eyes. Are you with him? The man who took us? No, Frank said firmly. We're trying to stop him. He's planning to leave Earth soon. We need to hurry. The blue-skinned alien spoke in a series of clicks and whistles. Liana responded in kind, then translated for Frank. His name is untranslatable in your language. He thanks us for rescue. He was diplomatic. Envoy following same energy signatures I tracked. Harex captured him 5 days ago. Can he help us fight Harex? Frank asked. Liana consulted with the alien again. Yes, he knows Harex's ship design. Can help disable launch system. Good, Frank said. He turned to Olivia and Gary. You two should hide. Get as far from the property as possible. Olivia shook her head. I was a police officer for 20 years before I retired. If this man is hurting people, I want to help stop him. Gary nodded in agreement. He took samples from us. Did things to us. I'm not running away. Frank respected their courage. All right, but we need weapons. They searched the rest of the basement and found a locked cabinet. Liana and the blue alien worked together to open it, revealing several devices that looked similar to the gun Harex had used on Frank. Careful, Liana warned as she distributed the weapons. These are stun weapons. 1 shot paralyzes. 2 shots can kill. Frank examined the weapon in his hand. It was surprisingly light, with no trigger. Just a smooth surface where his thumb rested. How do I fire it? Think about firing, Liana explained. Weapon reads neural impulses through skin contact. Frank concentrated and the weapon hummed slightly in his hand. That's going to take some getting used to. No time to practice, Liana said. Ship's energy signature increasing. Launch imminent. They quickly made their way back upstairs and out of the house. The humming from beyond the barn had grown louder, and the air shimmer had expanded to reveal parts of a sleek metallic vessel about the size of a small airplane. We need to split up, Frank suggested. Some of us distract Harex while others disable the ship. The blue alien spoke again and Liana nodded. He says there are access panels on ship's underside. If we can reach them, he can initiate emergency shutdown. Okay, Frank said. Olivia, you and I will draw Harex's attention. Liana, you and the others get to those panels. They split into 2 groups and approached the ship from different directions. Frank and Olivia used farm equipment for cover, moving from a tractor to a grain cart, getting closer to the now visible landing gear of the ship. Suddenly, a beam of energy struck the ground near Frank's feet. He looked up to see Harex standing on a ramp extending from the ship, holding a larger version of their weapons. I admire your persistence, Harex called out, but I've invested too much time on this backward planet to leave empty-handed. Frank and Olivia ducked behind a piece of equipment as another energy beam hit nearby, sending sparks flying. Keep him talking, Olivia whispered. I'll try to get a clean shot. Frank nodded and called out to Harex. Why humans? There must be plenty of species out there. Harex laughed. Humans have a unique genetic structure. Your kind evolved in isolation, developing natural resistance to many forms of control technology. This makes you perfect test subjects for my weapons. As Harex spoke, Frank caught glimpses of Liana and the others reaching the underside of the ship. The blue alien was working on a panel while Gary kept watch. And what exactly are these weapons for? Frank asked, trying to keep Harex's attention. The highest bidder, of course, Harex replied. Currently, that's the Norvac Dominion. They're quite interested in technology that can bypass neural defenses. Frank risked a glance around the equipment. Harex was slowly approaching, weapon raised. And they'd use this against Liana's people? The Vashin? Among others. The Norvac have ambitious expansion plans. Harex was close now, close enough that Frank could see the inhuman coldness in his eyes. But enough talk. Harex raised his weapon and fired. At the same moment, Olivia stepped out from her hiding place and fired her own weapon. The energy beams passed each other in the air. Harex's shot missed Frank by inches. Olivia's caught Harex in the shoulder, causing him to stagger back. He didn't fall, though, recovering quickly and turning his weapon toward Olivia. Before he could fire again, a loud alarm blared from the ship. Lights flickered across its surface and the humming engine sound changed to a lower pitch. No! Harex shouted, looking back at his ship. Emergency lockdown! Liana's team had succeeded. The blue alien emerged from beneath the ship, making triumphant gestures. Harex's face contorted with rage. He turned back to Frank and Olivia, weapon raised. "You've ruined everything." Herrex fired wildly at Frank and Olivia. They dove in opposite directions as the energy beam scorched the ground between them. Frank rolled behind a metal container, his heart pounding in his chest. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Herrex shouted. "The technology I've developed is worth more than this entire primitive planet." Frank caught Olivia's eye across the open space. She gestured to her left, indicating she would move that way. Frank nodded and prepared to move right, creating a two-sided attack. Meanwhile, Liana and Gary rushed to join the blue alien beneath the ship. The ship's alarms continued to blare and lights flashed across its hull. "What's happening?" Gary asked, pointing at the ship. "Emergency systems activated," the blue alien explained through Liana's translation. "Ship locked down for 15 minutes. Cannot launch." "Can we make it permanent?" Gary asked. The alien made a series of clicking sounds. Liana nodded. "If we reach main control room inside, yes, but Herrex must not get back on board." Frank heard this exchange and called out to Herrex, trying to keep his attention. "Your ship's not going anywhere. Surrender now and maybe Liana's people will go easy on you." Herrex laughed, a cold sound with no humor in it. "You think I came to this backwater world without contingency plans?" He pressed something on his wrist. Suddenly, the seemingly decorative silos around the property opened up, and metallic objects floated out. "Security drones," Liana warned. "Take cover." The drones, each about the size of a basketball, spread out across the property. Red beams shot from their centers, scanning the area. One spotted Gary and fired a pulse of energy that narrowly missed him. "Get to the ship," Frank shouted to Liana's group. "We'll handle the drones." Olivia aimed her weapon at the nearest drone and fired. The energy pulse hit directly, causing the drone to spin wildly before crashing to the ground. "They're vulnerable," she called out. "One shot takes them down." Frank targeted another drone and concentrated. His weapon hummed and fired, missing the fast-moving target. He tried again, focusing harder, and this time hit the drone dead center. It dropped like a stone. Herrex used the distraction to run toward his ship. Frank saw him and sprinted to intercept, tackling him just before he reached the ramp. They tumbled to the ground, Herrex's weapon spinning away. "You meddling primitive," Herrex snarled, his human disguise beginning to flicker. Underneath, his true form had grayish skin and enlarged eyes. "You have no idea what forces you're dealing with." Frank struggled to hold him down, but Herrex was stronger than he looked. With a powerful shove, he threw Frank off and scrambled to his feet. Olivia fired at Herrex, but he dodged with inhuman speed. He retrieved his weapon and fired back, forcing her to take cover. Above them, drones continued to swarm. Gary had picked up a long metal pole and was swinging it at any drone that came close, while the blue alien worked frantically at another ship panel. Liana ran to help Frank, firing her weapon at Herrex. He ducked behind a piece of farm equipment, returning fire, and keeping them pinned down. "We need to get to the ship controls," Liana said urgently, "before lockdown ends." "I'll keep him busy," Frank promised. "You get inside." Frank looked around for something to use as a distraction. He spotted his truck parked nearby. An idea formed in his mind. "Cover me," he told Liana, then sprinted toward his truck. Energy beams from Herrex's weapon hit the ground near his feet, but Frank kept running. He reached the truck, jumped in, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. Frank shifted into gear and floored the accelerator, driving straight toward Herrex's position. Herrex's eyes widened as the truck barreled toward him. He fired at the front of the vehicle, causing the engine to smoke, but it was too late to stop. Its momentum. Frank jumped out seconds before the truck crashed into the farm equipment where Herrex was hiding. The impact created a tremendous noise and sent pieces of metal flying everywhere. Liana used the distraction to race up the ship's ramp, followed by the blue alien. Gary helped Olivia fight off the remaining drones, which seemed to be functioning less effectively now. Frank picked himself up from the ground, wincing at a pain in his side where he'd landed hard. Through the smoke and dust from the crash, he saw a figure moving. Herrex emerged, limping but still dangerous, his weapon still in his hand. "Your species is more resourceful than I expected," Herrex said, his voice now distorted and inhuman. "But this changes nothing." Even if I can't leave with my ship, my buyers will come looking when I don't deliver. And when they find me gone, they'll simply take this whole planet apart to find what they want. Frank stood his ground. Maybe, but today you lose. Herrex raised his weapon. I don't think so. Before he could fire, Frank heard a high-pitched whine from behind him. A beam of energy, different from the weapons they'd been using, shot past Frank and hit Herrex directly in the chest. Herrex convulsed, his body glowing from within, then collapsed to the ground, motionless. Frank turned to see Liana standing on the ship's ramp, holding a much larger weapon than before. Ship security system, she explained. Meant for defense, against boarding parties. Is he dead? Frank asked, approaching Herrex's still form cautiously. No, contained, like suspended animation. He will stay like this until properly imprisoned by authorities. The remaining security drones suddenly dropped from the air, deactivated now that their controller was incapacitated. Gary and Olivia joined Frank and Liana by the ship. What now? Gary asked, looking at the alien ship with wide eyes. We must. Secure ship and prevent detection by your planet's authorities, Liana said. Then contact my people secretly. They entered the ship together. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with smooth metallic walls covered in control panels and displays showing strange symbols. The blue alien was already working at the main console, its tentacled fingers moving rapidly over the controls. Kento, you shut everything down? Frank asked. Liana nodded. Yes. Full power down except for containment systems for prisoners. What about... Frank hesitated, unsure how to ask. What about the humans he experimented on? The ones who didn't survive? Liana's expression softened. We will ensure proper treatment of remains, and help survivors if possible. The blue alien made a series of clicking sounds. Liana translated. He says ship records show 17 humans taken over past 3 years. 5 still alive counting. Gary and Olivia, others... She paused. Did not survive procedures. Frank felt anger building inside him. And your people just let this happen? You said Earth was off limits, but you didn't protect us. Border responsibilities unclear, Liana admitted. Political complications. Not excuse, but explanation. That's not good enough, Frank said firmly. If your people won't protect us, we need to protect ourselves. Liana studied him thoughtfully. Perhaps you're right. The blue alien spoke again. Longer this time. Liana listened, then turned to Frank. He suggests alternative to official contact. If we report Herrex dead and research destroyed, no quarantine protocol. But we must ensure no technology remains functional. And what happens to Earth? Frank asked. Do we just wait for the next alien criminal to decide we're a good hiding spot? That, said Liana, is a complex question that requires careful thought. 3 days after the confrontation with Herrex, Frank sat on his porch watching the sunset over his ranch. His cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware that their world had changed forever. Frank's body was still sore from the fight, but his mind was occupied with much bigger concerns. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Frank watched as a battered pickup truck pulled up to his house. Liana stepped out, now dressed in blue jeans and a flannel shirt that made her look almost human. Only her eyes, with their unusual reflective quality, gave away her true nature. Nice disguise, Frank said as she joined him on the porch. Thank you. Olivia helped me find appropriate clothing. Liana sat in the chair beside him. The others are settled at the safe location. The safe location was an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the national forest, far from any roads or hiking trails. Olivia, Gary, and the 3 other human survivors were recovering there, along with the blue alien diplomat. How are they doing? Frank asked. Physical recovery is progressing. Mental adjustment will take longer. Liana looked out at the ranch. Your world is beautiful. I understand better now why it is protected. Frank snorted. Protected is a funny word for it. From what you've told me, we're more like an animal preserve. Look, but don't touch. Earth's status is complicated, Liana admitted. Your species has potential that frightens some galactic powers. Because we're resistant to your control technology? Partly. Also your adaptability. Most species evolve slowly, specialize for specific environments. Humans adapt quickly to new circumstances. Valuable trait, dangerous trait. Frank considered this. Over the past 3 days, he had learned more about the galaxy than he ever imagined. How Earth sat at the edge of 3 major power blocks. How humanity's isolation was both protection and prison. "Have you contacted your people yet?" he asked. Liana nodded. "Brief message only. Reported Harex dead, research destroyed, ship self-destructed. No mention of survivors or human assistance, and they believed it? For now. We'll send scout ship to verify in approximately 30 days. By then, all evidence will be gone." After securing Harex's ship, they had worked carefully to remove all the alien technology and research materials. The ship itself was now hidden in an abandoned mineshaft, with its power system set to gradually degrade. Harex remained in suspended animation, locked in a secure compartment. "And what about your blue friend? When will his people come for him?" He sent similar message, claiming research dead end, returning by commercial transport. Liana's lips quirked in what Frank had learned was her version of a smile. Diplomatic fiction. Preserves everyone's position. Frank leaned forward in his chair. But that still leaves us with the big question. What happens to Earth now? Harex said his buyers would come looking, and even if they don't, what's to stop the next alien criminal from setting up shop here? Liana was quiet for a moment. "I have been thinking about this. Have proposal. Unofficial monitoring network." "What does that mean exactly?" "I stay behind, act as advisor, early warning system. You recruit others. People you trust, people like you who live in remote areas, notice unusual things." Frank raised his eyebrows. "You want to create a secret alien detection network made up of, what, ranchers and farmers?" "Yes." Liana sounded completely serious. "Your profession makes you ideal. You observe land, animals, weather patterns, notice changes, live far from cities where unusual activity more visible." The idea was so unexpected that Frank had to laugh. "So instead of your government officially protecting Earth, you want a bunch of rural folks with pickup trucks to do it?" "Not instead of, in addition to." Liana looked at him intently. "Official channels move slowly. Politics involved. This way, Earth has extra layer of protection, and my people have deniability." Frank thought about it. He knew plenty of ranchers, farmers, and small-town folks who were observant, practical, and good at keeping secrets. People who knew their land so well they could spot anything out of place. "It's crazy enough it might work," he admitted. "But how would we communicate with you? And what would we do if we actually found something?" Communication methods can be arranged. Simple technology disguised as ordinary objects. Liana touched the watch on her wrist. "As for response, observe, report, contain if possible. I would handle contact with authorities when necessary." Frank stared out at his land, thinking of all the small towns and rural communities spread across America, places where strangers stood out, where people knew their neighbors and their land. "I know some folks up in Wyoming who'd be perfect for this," he said slowly. "And my cousin in Idaho. Good people who can keep their mouths shut." "This is what I hoped." Liana seemed pleased. "Network can grow slowly, carefully. What about Olivia and Gary and the others? What happens to them? They need time to heal. Then, if willing, they could help. Their experience valuable." Frank nodded. "Olivia's already talking about setting up a program to track missing hikers and campers in the national parks. She thinks some might be like her, taken but not officially missing." "Good idea," Liana agreed. Many abductions from remote areas never investigated properly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Frank saw them differently now, not as distant points of light but as places where other beings lived, some of whom apparently considered Earth important enough to argue over, but not important enough to protect. "So what's your cover story going to be?" Frank asked eventually. "You can't just tell people you're an alien." "I was thinking, livestock veterinarian, specialized training. Reason to visit many ranches, farms, Frank chuckled. Not bad, we could always use more vets out here. His phone rang. Frank checked the number. It was Bill Johnson, a rancher from the next county over. Hey, Bill, he answered. What's up? Frank, weird question, but have you seen any unusual lights over your north pasture lately? Martha and I spotted something strange last night, hovering over the tree line. Wasn't like any aircraft I've ever seen. Frank looked at Liana, who had heard the conversation with her enhanced hearing. She nodded slowly. Actually, Bill, Frank said, I've seen something similar. Why don't you come over tomorrow and we'll talk about it? And bring that satellite map of your property, will you? I want to show you something. After hanging up, Frank turned to Liana. Looks like your network just got its first new member. Earth has been alone in galaxy for a long time, Liana said, looking up at the stars. Not truly alone anymore. Frank thought about everything that had happened since he drove to Harold Kane's farm looking for a horse. How his world had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. How he now bore a responsibility he never asked for, but couldn't walk away from. You know, he said, my grandfather used to tell me that the most important job of a rancher isn't raising cattle. It's being a good steward of the land, protecting it for future generations. He gestured to the vast sky above them. Guess we just expanded the definition of land a bit. Liana nodded in understanding. Good stewards. I like this concept. As night fell completely, they continued planning the details of Earth's first, unofficial line of defense against the stars. A network of observant, practical people who were good at noticing when something wasn't right, and who knew how to keep secrets when necessary. People who understood that sometimes protection came, not from governments or authorities, but from ordinary individuals who chose to stand guard. The unlikely alliance had begun,